The inner state of the man of concupiscence, from Sirach chapter 23, verse 16 to 24. General Audience number 39 of September 10th, 1980. We are reflecting on the following words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. Whoever looks at a woman to desire her lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart, has already made her an adulteress in his heart. Matthew chapter 5, verse 28. Christ says these words to an audience that was in some way prepared for understanding the meaning of a look born from concupiscence. Already last Wednesday, we pointed to texts drawn from the wisdom books. Here, for example, is another passage in which the biblical author analyzes the state of soul of the man dominated by concupiscence of the flesh. Quote, desire, blazing like a furnace, will not die down until it has been satisfied. The man who is shameless in his body will not stop until the fire devours him. To the impure man, all bread is sweet. He will not grow tired until he dies. The man who is unfaithful to his own marriage bed says to himself, who can see me? There's darkness all around me. The walls hide me. No one can see me. Why should I be afraid? The Most High will not remember my sins. What he fears are human eyes. He does not realize that the eyes of the Lord are 10,000 times brighter than the sun. They see all the acts of men and penetrate into the most secret corners. Likewise, the woman who abandons her husband, who provides him with heirs received from a stranger. Sirach chapter 23, verses 16 to 22. Analogous descriptions are not lacking in world literature. Certainly, many of them are distinguished by a more penetrating psychological insight and a more intense suggestiveness and expressive power. Yet the biblical description in Sirach, chapter 23, verses 16 to 22, has some elements that can be considered classical in the analysis of carnal concupiscence. One such element is, for example, the comparison between the concupiscence of the flesh and fire, flaring up in the man. It invades his senses, arouses his body, draws the feelings along with itself, and in some way takes possession of the heart. Such passion, springing from carnal concupiscence, suffocates the deepest voice of conscience in the heart. It suffocates the sense of responsibility before God. This suffocation is made especially evident in the biblical text just quoted. There remains, on the other hand, an external modesty in relation to human beings, or rather an appearance of decency, that manifests itself as fear of the consequences rather than of the evil in itself. Suffocating the voice of conscience, passion brings restlessness of the body and of the senses. It is the restlessness of the outer man. Once the inner man has been reduced to silence, and passion has, as it were, gained freedom of action, passion manifests itself as an insistent tendency towards satisfying the senses in the body. This satisfaction, according to the criteria of the man dominated by passion, ought to extinguish the fire, but, on the contrary, it does not reach the sources of inner peace. It only touches the most external levels of the human individual. And here the biblical author rightly observes that the man whose will is occupied with satisfying the senses does not find rest, nor does he find himself, but on the contrary, consumes himself. Passion aims at satisfaction. Hence it blunts reflective activity and disregards the voice of conscience. And thus, since it has in itself no principle of indestructibility, it wears itself out. What is co-natural to it is the dynamism of use, which tends to exhaust itself. It is true that when passion is set into the whole of the spirit's deepest energies, it can also become a creative force. In this case, however, it must undergo a radical transformation. If, on the other hand, it suffocates the deepest powers of the heart and of conscience, as in the account of Sirach chapter 23, verse 17 to 22, it consumes itself, and the man who has prayed to it indirectly consumes himself. Christ's call to halt at the threshold of the look. When Christ in the Sermon on the Mount speaks about the man who desires and who looks with desire, one can take it for granted that he had before his eyes also the images known to his audience through the wisdom tradition. Yet, at the same time, he refers to every human being who, on the basis of his own experience, knows what it means to desire, to look with desire. The teacher does not analyze this experience, nor does he describe it, as, for example, Sirach chapter 23, verse 17 to 22 does. He seems to take for granted, I would say, a sufficient knowledge of that inner fact to which he draws the attention of his listeners, both present listeners then and potential listeners later. Is it possible that any of them could fail to grasp the issue? If he truly knows nothing about it, the content of Christ's words would not apply to him, nor would any analysis or description be able to explain it to him. If he does know, in this case, we are in fact dealing with knowledge that is completely interior, located within the heart and conscience, he will immediately understand when these words refer to him. Christ, therefore, does not describe or analyze what constitutes the experience of desiring, the experience of the concupiscence of the flesh. One even has the impression that he does not penetrate into this experience in the whole breadth of its inner dynamism, as Sirach, for example, does, but rather stops on its threshold. The desire has not yet transformed itself into an external act. It has not yet become an act of the body. It is still an interior act of the heart. It expresses itself in the look, in the way of looking at the woman, yet it allows itself to be understood. It reveals its essential content and quality. We must now offer such an analysis. The look expresses what is in the heart. The look, I would say, expresses man as a whole. If one assumes in general that man, quote, acts in conformity with what he is, operare sequitur esse, operation follows being, in the present case, Christ wants to show that man looks in conformity with what he is. Intuere sequitur esse, looking follows being. Through the look, man shows himself in the outside and to others. Above all, he shows what he perceives in his interior. Christ teaches us thus to see the look as the threshold, as it were, of the interior truth. Already in the look, in the way one looks, it is possible to grasp fully what concupiscence is. Let us try to explain it. Lustful desiring, looking to desire, indicates an experience of the value of the body in which its spousal meaning ceases to be spousal precisely because of concupiscence. What also ceases is its procreative meaning. We have spoken about this meaning above, which, when it concerns the conjugal union of man and woman, is rooted in the spousal meaning of the body and comes forth organically, as it were, from it. So then, when man desires and looks to desire, as we read in Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 to 28, he experiences more or less explicitly the detachment from that meaning of the body, which, as we have already observed in our reflection, stands at the basis of the communion of persons, both outside of marriage and, in a particular way, when man and woman are called to build a union in the body, as the gospel of the beginning says in the classical text of Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. The experience of the spousal meaning of the body is particularly subordinated to the sacramental call, but is not limited to it. This meaning is characteristic of the freedom of the gift, which, as we will see in more detail in the analyses below, can realize itself not only in marriage, but also in a different way. Christ says, whoever looks at a woman to desire her, that is, whoever looks with concupiscence, has already committed adultery with her in his heart, has already made her an adulteress in his heart. Matthew chapter 5, verse 28. Does he not mean to say thereby that precisely concupiscence, like adultery, is an inner detachment from the spousal meaning of the body? Does he not want to refer his listeners to their inner experiences of such detachment? Is it not for this reason that he defines it as adultery committed in the heart?